Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jacqueline Smart toka ingoa no whakatani ahau. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Okay, this is going to be a rapid rattle through what I could probably sit around and chat to you all about for about 2 to 3 hours. So if anybody wants that, more immersive, one-on-one, feel free to contact us. I've got my email at the end, or grab a card. The reason I suggest that you might want to do that is I've stripped everything out here that's relative to New Zealand brands, because I feel that this isn't probably a good forum to be calling out what some brands are or aren't doing. And so a lot of what I'm talking about here is the theory and using some overseas advertising to dramatise that. And then if you guys want to just check at any stage where or what this might mean for your own brands or organisations, then we can just do that gently somewhere else. It was interesting that we quickly just put out, Alison and I thought we might just bang out a quick survey monkey to sort of see where sustainability sits relative to your brand's value proposition and then specifically to your current brand story. Ideally, those two things would be concordant. There's a little bit, as you can see, for some of you, not a massive sample here, so this is not the most rigorous survey sample, but there's a little bit of a gap between, yes, it is central to our value proposition, but we haven't yet quite worked out how to make that central to our brand story, so some lost value action gap there for consumers. And certainly there's a few of you just going, not really sure. So this might be a really good starting point to see whether in fact actually you, after listening to this, you realise that sustainability is central to, or could be. But the no is really interesting as well. So the theme of this really is that you can't not be sustainable anymore. It is a business imperative, and then how you manage to make that cohesive and holistic to everything that you do, including how that's expressed and is connected to your brands and your products, is the sort of the theme, I guess. Certainly for consumers, when we asked what is the big issues for your consumers, we heard what we would always expect to hear: price, customer service, responsiveness. There was a few smatterings of sort of sustainability, accountability, transparency. But this is from Colmar Brunton's, it's the sustainability goals that they went back and checked against New Zealand. So this is a representative of the New Zealand population of all cohorts. This is what they care about. You probably can't quite read that, but you may have already read, or I think Colmar presented this to you. 60 to 80% of all consumers go they care deeply about all of the sustainability goals. There's a hell of a lot of them. How do you pack all that together and make that part of a story so that you're not just peppering it randomly and having what we would call in our industry a diffused voice, which is where you have wasted value. So really quickly, just to get through what we did, so using it's an anthropological lens, which is about culture, as opposed to, say, a psychological one, and semiotics being a key part of that. And semiotics is where you decode anything that is meant to have meaning for humans. So signs, symbols, images, and we in the advertising specific part and communications part of the industry have to really know how to deliver semiotics so that we're decoding what we are all naturally processing as consumers. So a lot of what I am going to tell you today, you will instinctively and intuitively know. You'll nod your head and go, yeah, that makes complete sense. It won't be revolutionary. It's just that the way that we present it back suddenly gives you a little bit of clarity about how you can be intentional with what you say or don't say. So that's essentially the thrust of the data and how I captured that. The reason why it's so important to do semiotics periodically is because culture is literally just created by the people that use it. That's what culture is. Everything is constructed. There are actually no truths. So what we need to do is constantly look at how that's changing and evolving, and particularly around sustainability, because sustainability is not static. And it isn't a moment in time, and it's actually become much more dynamic and increasingly become something that needs to be a conversation we can have very fast and rapidly within our own businesses, but critically have that at the same time with our consumers in a way that's very easy for them to be able to buy what we're saying. And I use the word buy intentionally because we need to be able to have this return a commercial and economic value, not just a feel good. This isn't about just something sort of fluffy that we put out on the side or just a nice way to differentiate ourselves in the absence of anything else to say, something that we say over here in our advertising but isn't in any way connected to our business, our products or our supply chain, etc. So we must be deliberate, we must be in step, and we cannot be anachronistic in the way that we talk about sustainability because we'll get called out really quickly by our consumers. In culture, there are always, at any given time, residual, dominant and emerging codes. They are shifting all the time. If you are communicating around a residual code, essentially this is where brand value will get lost. And you can quite quickly see how brands or products go out of favour, for want of a better word. And you have to work quite hard and spend a lot of time and money to get them back to being actually dominant. Or you have to, as LMP did, for example, go really retro on it in order to bring it back into the future. Dominant codes reflect where the main conversations have been had, where it is mass. It's kind of current value, but what's important is when you are dominant, you've got to be really aware of what's emerging and what's coming up because you'll really quickly get sort of pushed back into being residual. So emerging codes are the cusp of where all of the good stuff's happening. That's where a bit of tension's coming from, that's where you're hearing consumer conversation. And the good thing here is that it's the infiltration of new thinking in the approach. That's where all the new value is going to come from. That's where if you want to be a leader in sustainability, where you want to deliver thought leadership, where you want to be a progressive brand, where you want to be a brand leader, you kind of got to be in that place. And most of the great brands, and particularly the ones in New Zealand, know how to read that change between dominant and emerging codes really well and how to position and nuance their brand story. So we found 5 sustainability metaphors which we are going to go through and look at. These are the metaphors that sit underneath the overarching metaphor of sustainability, which is a big journey. I won't go into that one quite now, but what we're going to look at is the representation and expressions of sustainability. We're going to, at the end of this session, have a sort of a 10-minute break and see if we can work out ourselves what we think the emerging metaphorical code is, and then I'll show you what I've come across. It took quite a bit of work to get there actually. It really is emerging. It's quite hard to see it. So I think that will be the interesting part of this conversation. So I'm going to go through the residual codes really quickly because you could probably all sit there and go, yep, great, we know we used to be there or we know we wouldn't be there now. I spend a little bit of time on the dominant codes, mutualism and mindfulness, and then get into the emerging codes with you. So sustainability as a colour. We can probably all just sit there and go, yeah, we know, we used to probably do that. It's very thin, it's a superficial representation, it's expressed very literally. It's interesting though that this sort of literal depiction is still kind of happening. It's quite empty. It's a literal connection to the so-called assumed desired colour that sustainability can be about green and therefore is quite single-mindedly attached to the environment, so whether that's authentically or otherwise. There's an assumed starting point, and in both of the residual metaphors there's an assumed starting point that there is something really wrong. There's something problematic, there is a massive imbalance, and sustainability is about overcorrection. So the colour green here symbolises equilibrium, and it's a and the pushback on this, and you'll always know you're in a residual code when you start to see a pushback or where that pushback's been played back. And the pushback here clearly is the greenwashing label. But it's interesting that some brands are still colour coding and seeing that as being a sustainability. The other aspect of this metaphor is when you talk about being eco-friendly, eco-inspired. It's an extension of the green metaphor. The colour green can become a method to communicate a product or a brand has minimal impact. The trouble is that it's becoming quite a disingenuous metaphor because it's not really played out on product cues. It's not in any of the information on the back of the product. It's often at times exaggerated beyond actually what the brand or the business is doing, and quite often it's just catching up with regulatory requirements. So it's like, okay, we're legal, we're compliant, let's make a big song and dance about it, turn it into a brand campaign or a brand story, and the consumers can kind of see that through that. Or in fact, actually, they haven't really been explicit about how this product is actually helping you offset your environmental footprint. So I didn't want to spend too long on that one because you can probably all sit there and go, yep, we realise that. The other one that's really important to understand that's quite residual is humans as all-powerful. And this is a very human-centric take on the world, that humans are presented as separate but also more powerful to nature. And therefore we are, as consumers, held accountable for the destruction of the planet, or alternatively held responsible for saving the planet. And through this lens, sustainability creates a separation between humankind and nature. Nature is usually portrayed relative to human intervention, so it's either exploited, conquered or saved. And humans are portrayed therefore as either good or bad, very binary. Whenever you've got something binary in a issue as complex and replete with meaning and value as sustainability, you know you're in trouble. So I'm going to go through the three narratives that can run through this metaphor. The first one is humans as destroyers. Nature here is always depicted as the underdog. Sustainability is framed as the environment being at the mercy of humans. It asserts the planet is in imminent danger of being destroyed. This metaphor holds a position of doom and gloom. Humans are responsible for destruction and instability. Humans are also seen to use this power, and this is what's interrogated within all of the sustainability stories. It's quite negative and pessimistic, and the metaphor is almost like we're at battle. Humans are at battle or war with the world, and sustainability's job therefore is to try and create some kind of ceasefire. So you can see the imagery here. Some of the ads that I'm going to show you is the journey that some brands have been on, that they started off here. One in particular you'll see me play through is GE, where they started, where they went and where they are now, and it's really good to understand that's what you've got to be thinking about where you place your brand story. Even if you're at the start of the sustainability story, don't come in at the beginning. You're going to have to come in at where everybody else is now. So here's an example of Greenpeace piece that really played up this thoughtlessness of humans and how nature is literally displaced and lives outside of human environment. I'm not going to play the whole ad because I haven't got time, but it's clearly a way to dramatise what is unnatural, where help is needed and by whom, and how we are really all humans, not just Shell in that instant, but all humans who just turn our back on nature. Bit of a finger pointing kind of an exercise. You can flip this around. So you can flip this narrative around and make humans the saviour of nature, a bit grandiose and an overclaim. So this is where we possess a moral responsibility to save the planet from harm. It's interesting that this narrative continues that disconnection still between humans and nature, with nature often depicted in this narrative is really abstract. So you'll see lots of people with the world and an ice cream cone and it's melting. So they make it an actual concept and not something that is just around us and innate and natural to who we all are. And this context also presents, again, war, but this time humans, instead of being the ones that are raging war on the environment, we are the saviours. Why I've played, what I want to show you is how you can sometimes make the enemy not the human. So if you get a character like Darth Vader, who we all know is more evil than us, at least it puts the consumer one step back from being the worst thing that could happen. Just remember that consumers are meant to be receiving these messages and relating to them. So if you make it too confronting for them, they sort of like turn their backs on it. But it's very judgmental, it's quite critical, and it places a lot of onus on the consumer. Here's a good example of a brand that really calls humans out as having power in a literal sense, but actually also as consumers, and that just by the choices of what we buy, we are actually destroying the rainforest and clearly the animals that live in it. Uses shock and guilt, makes us feel selfish, ignorant. You have to have empathy as a consumer to relate to this, and not everybody has empathy. So you can't even assume that we are all empathetic just because we are human. So in here, clearly the viewer is not the solution, they are the problem. You've probably seen a lot of these, so I'm assuming you may know these ads yourselves. Ready? Okay, so she's got a bad mum. Okay, so I was just going to show you an example where you can actually use, as I said, a character like Darth Vader to juxtaposition good and bad, where human is not automatically the bad in that binary. And it just helps the viewer feel a little less of a villain, but also it uses entertainment value, which is also important. It's in German, so for those of you who don't speak.
Essayez d'expliquer ça à vos futurs beaux-parents. Attention, je suis pas un mauvais bougre, j'ai juste un problème d'image. J'ai toujours eu, c'est mon côté obscur. Et pourtant, l'obscurité, ça peut aussi être bien. Contre le réchauffement de la planète, par exemple. Alors, comme moi, éteignez la lumière le 27 mars, entre 20h30 et 21h30.
So you have to, in order to be able to make a joke about a narrative, you have to know that it's already been well set up. So when anyone's doing a parody about something, that's also usually a kind of a good cue that it's either very dominant and a well-worn narrative, or we've actually got so over it we can mock it. So the next narrative that sits under humans as all-powerful is mastery of nature, where nature is presented as the domain for humans to control and manipulate for human advantage or benefit. This narrative manifests itself in a lot of imagery that celebrates man-made structures imposed upon, and also a demonstration of the ability for us to be able to celebrate the triumph of being able to master nature for our benefit. There is implied in this also that we are not therefore destroying nature, but it is still through a human-centric versus nature lens, and it's usually done quite dramatically. It's more about celebrating the mastery of the impressive feats of humans than it is about a sustainability story as such. Here's an example which you will probably all remember. It's a campaign for wind energy that suggests that only when humans can come in and turn energy into something good does it have any purpose or value. It dramatises that for most people it's an annoyance, but because humans have come in and mastered it, it has now become something useful. And wind is personified as lonely and purposeless.
I think I was always misunderstood. People just didn't seem to like me. I think I annoyed them. I got on their nerves. I don't know why. That's just the way it was. Yeah. Maybe I was too intense. Maybe I came on too strong. I don't know. I really can't say. Yeah, it was lonely. Really lonely. But you get used to it after a while. And then one day everything changed. Somebody finally accepted me for what I am. Since I've got this job, life is completely different. I finally feel useful, good at something.
Okay, I won't carry on. It's great to see that you're all enjoying watching advertising though. So now let's get into the dominant sustainability metaphors. There's two big metaphors that are pervasive: mutualism and mindfulness. So mutualism is starts to make a big shift between the separation of humans or humankind and nature, and now we shift to interdependence between humans and nature, so literally being joined at the hip. So there are two strong narratives that run through this: the interconnectedness of nature and humans and a symbiotic relationship therefore, and stewardship around care and governance. So a lot of you will probably recognise that this is maybe where your businesses and your brands are sitting now. This interconnection is also a big shift in social equity and not just environmental bearability, if you like, or equity. And so now when you start to move into a dominant expression of sustainability, we've gone beyond just the environment, and we're striving for balance and equilibrium in nature and others. This symbolises that mutualism is a biological metaphor, which kind of makes sense, but it presents the relationship where humans and nature must be in partnership. So this interconnectedness, the theme presents humans and nature reliant on each other, not nature at the mercy of humans. We need to work together. Sustainability is depicted as connected around shared goals and purpose, as opposed to us imposing our goal or purpose on nature, as we just saw in the residual metaphor. And also, it's much more around equal footing with nature. So we're not more powerful to nature, not better than, but equal to. And the balance there is about making sure that equilibrium is maintained rather than coming in with a benevolent or a manipulative approach, as we see in the residual narratives and metaphors. So here you get things like partnership, harmony and balance coming through. And this is a great example that shows that we can be appreciated by nature, that actually nature values humans as much as humans can value nature. There are not distinctions, there are no sides anymore, and that actually nature helps us to help it. We can feel good and we're not told to be good. So if you get that, if you can move away from sort of finger pointing and calling people out and so forth, you know that you're at least in a dominant place. So it's quite a nice shift away from sort of admonishing and saying sort of, you know, stop the war or make peace or save the world, which is all actually so exaggerated and really overwhelming for a consumer and probably implausible, I would imagine, for us as one business or brand to be able to actually claim. Another good example of mutualism is demonstrating the view that humans can be quite ingenious in how they allow nature to help us. And we start to, there's a sense of innocence and wonder that can come through here, but nature becomes the hero in a lot of these narratives as opposed to the human.
Capturing the wind and putting it to good use. Wind energy from GE.
But the reason I've got that there is GE because I'm going to show you where actually GE is now, and that's where they used to be but because they always want to be emerging and delivering leadership, brand leadership and sustainability leadership, they're not there anymore. And the key thing is to make sure you're really conscious of which metaphor your brand might be attached to. Try ideally not to have one that's residual, one that's dominant, and possibly one that's emerging at any given time, because that is going to diffuse your voice and reduce it. And try not to have as many of those narratives as you could possibly grab either. So it can't be a grab bag. You've got to actually understand what is it that we really want our story to be and which metaphor would we use. So stewardship, a lot of you will be aware of this. This is probably where sustainability started after we moved beyond the sort of 70s clean, green, 100% sort of New Zealand sort of approach. This is where sustainability was in a pocket. Corporate social responsibility, something over there that one person in an organisation might have done, as opposed to now sustainability clearly being a business imperative that we, you know, what's great to see is how many of you here come from multiple roles within your organisation and how it's a business imperative, not just a marketing or a sponsorship or a procurement reporting imperative. And when we look at stewardship, it is a different form of mutualism. It's called obligate mutualism. And this is where humans have an obligation to preserve the environment and act in partnership. It's a really important one in New Zealand, particularly because of kaitianga tanga, which is the guardianship, and because New Zealanders have a very maternal relationship with the land. So in New Zealand, the land equals the group, the people. It isn't the same in Australia. Probably no surprise why their sustainability progress isn't as advanced maybe, but in Australia the people equal the land. So this is a really core one in New Zealand. A lot of brands will be in this space. It may therefore not necessarily be a differentiator, but at least you know you're in good company. And the responsibility to rather than responsibility for is a really important distinction, because it's presented almost as well as an obligation to future generations. So this is more about preserving not just the environment, but actually our national identity. So it's a sort of a rich one for New Zealanders in particular. I'm not going to play you ads for that, because I think we're probably conversant with that one. I'm going to go into the mindfulness metaphor now, which is sort of aspirational in simple things being aspirational. This is something that we will pick up on when Alison talks to you about the Good Life Playbook. It is focusing around conscious and responsible consumption, reducing waste and poverty, and intentional human actions. But here there are three key narratives. A return to simpler, and almost therefore somewhat nostalgic in the way that we look at it, purposefully so, as opposed to being residual and unintentionally being anachronistic. A sustainable lifestyle, so sustainability becomes a lifestyle narrative, and conscious consumption. So brands can leverage stories of provenance, of origin, anywhere where you need transparency. Quite often a lot of food brands in particular would use this narrative attached to being part of their brand and also part of their business model. It's based around often ideal imagery and not always reflective of everyday. So there is a sense that this is a niche aspect. The visual narratives often emphasize stories of humbleness, natural beginnings, and the story is in its sense is not necessarily sustainability. That's just presented as part of the DNA. It's just central to what is the origin of the product or the brand. Probably not a good idea to use or adopt this narrative if in fact actually that is not how your brand or your business was established in the first place. I'm sure you're all aware of this. I'll play it anyway, just because Chipotle was great as being really the first brand that came out and recognised the importance of entertainment as a key aspect and value that we need to do to create any kind of value exchange with the consumer. And also, you know, phenomenal in that what they did is they made it sustainability totally integrated around not just their business, but even the way that consumers could engage with that story. So they brought out a game that you could download at the same time, which sort of in 6 weeks got 500,000 game downloads. So they were saying in every consumer touch point and in every way you get to be able to engage with sustainability as part of who we are and what we do, and that's what we're enabling for you. You guys all know this one? Oh, I'll play it a little bit.
Come with me and you'll be in the world of pure imagination. Take a look and you'll see into your imagination. We'll begin with the spit living there.
I'm going to have to jump you just to the end. You'll have to come back for the full version of this with me later.
If you want to view paradise, simply look around and view it. Anything you want to do it. Want to change the world? There's nothing to it.
I mean, it's a great example of everything in there having meaning. The crow obviously represents death, which is manufactured goods, etc. Then there's a sustainable lifestyle, which is where it becomes a choice. Importantly, this seems to be just for those more informed, more compassionate individuals, committed enough to act. This narrative should be about democratising sustainability, but unfortunately it's quite often held as a sort of a golden egg, and it comes across as being niche, or we can charge for that, we can make that premium, that can be elitist, and that is actually in opposition to what the principles of sustainability is about. There is a sense here for those that embrace this that it's about enhancement of self and life and gratitude. Imagery serves to make sustainability about mind, body and soul, more of a focus on how it improves humans, but at the same time therefore protects nature. And the outcome of many of the decisions consumer makes is therefore self-enhancement, well-being and happiness. So it's connected to nature, but in a way that's more beneficial to humans. Conscious consumption, just rattling through, directly addressing the social and environmental imperatives of sustainable development, and it poses equitable alternatives. And there's some great examples of businesses and brands that have built their entire business model around being able to reduce demand side consumption. It's sort of like reversing capitalism, embracing the circular economy. It's a stand against unsustainable practices and provides value to the customer by demonstrating that they care about people more so than just profit, so putting people before profit. I think there's a sense of fairness that comes through, which is a really important value to New Zealanders right now. And also that brands and companies need each other, need the consumers as much as consumers need us. So it's thinking, how can we work really hand in hand with our consumers to make sure that we benefit each other, and therefore collectively joining up together, we make it really easy and possible to benefit this sustainable practices. So the tone's a little bit lighter, a bit more optimistic, a bit more positive. Probably conscious consumption was an emerging narrative. Now it isn't. The flip side of that is unconscious consumption, which is essentially greed. So sustainability becomes more about fairness to nature and to anything vulnerable, in particular children, and it becomes more the domain of charitable organisations. It's about kindness, it's about altruism, and particularly around the poverty gap. So it's a social development aspect or narrative that sits within sustainability and often is attached to cause marketing. But again, be careful, because its assumption is that we can leverage consumer guilt. So that's probably not a good thing to be doing. Now I'm going to, before we get to our break, I've gone really fast, so apologies for that, but I'm going to play you an ad that just helps to really signal that we clearly now are needing to really understand what the emerging metaphorical narratives are for sustainability, because whenever you get a good pushback in an ad campaign, you know that some of these dominant metaphors have sort of on the cusp of becoming less relevant. This is a great example of saying we just cannot make sustainability about compromise, sacrifice, effort, choice. We need to make it seamless and integral to what we do. We need to just make it something that is actually happening collectively with marketplace, not just brands telling consumers, can you go and do that, and can you go and do that, and because I've told you to do that, you might like me.
Hey Melissa, the whales need your help.
I love whales! Go, Melissa! I think I got whales!
Hey Melissa, now the trees need you. The ice caps are in trouble. Hey Melissa, now the rhinos need saving.
It's hard to be an eco-warrior, but it's easy to drive like one. Introducing the most fuel-efficient crossover.
Okay, we don't want to promote any brands, but so that's maybe what it feels like for consumers. That's maybe what the messages have been. You can't have a parody and you can't use humour if there isn't something that you're playing off. So whenever you see that coming through, you know, okay, gosh, okay, we need to move on to the next thing. So we now come to, did I make time? Sorry. We're coming to the bit now, which is you guys thinking at your tables, what do you imagine the emerging sustainability codes are, the metaphors, the narratives? Doesn't even matter how you frame it. What's happening in your business? What conversations do you think you're having? If you had to go out now and frame what your brand story should be around sustainability, what would you be using? What language? And I've kind of got a starter for 10 that we'll discuss after this, but what we're going to do is give you 10 minutes. We'll capture what everybody says, because then I can sort of write this all back up again and share it back with you. Definitely a couple of the themes that have come out are like bang on. The interconnectedness of nature, of humans and of marketplace, because in the past that hasn't been. So that's the triumphant. Certainly really great that you're all talking about technology and innovation, because that is central. And the other thing that's really important to get across as well is how now, so for those of you who've touched on the economy, it's part of the marketplace, the business, but there is now actually, it's really important that actually sustainability becomes has an economic value, and we don't need to be, but not in the way where we can charge more, or it's a niche product, or it's premiumized, or it's an elitist sort of a choice to have a lifestyle. So how can you use the economy to make mass what sustainable products, so it's a mass behaviour. Okay, so that's pretty awesome. Do you want to quickly run through what I saw, which is just how I've cobbled together sort of the things that you were talking about, and then we can go and have a cup of coffee? Okay, so it was really tricky actually, I'd have to say. It is emerging. I framed it as adaptive intelligence. The reason it's probably hard to be having these conversations and to be attaching them to your brands is because it is at the cusp. So you do grapple with it a little bit. Sometimes it's easier to see emerging metaphors than others, but it's interesting that in this particular sector or category it wasn't a simple exercise. But adaptive intelligence, interestingly, is around holistic assemblage, which is an anthropological economic term. It is exactly what we talked about, respect for the ability to find imagination and intelligence in nature, humans and the marketplace equally. And that's pretty much what I heard you all talking about. So what's great is that you all intuitively and instinctively and professionally know this. How do you then capture that and get anybody else to be able to attach that to your brand story in a way that consumers are going to want to engage with it? It is again the things that you talked about, effortless advancement and progress. We need to get sustainability to move well beyond an action or an inaction. Have you done something or are you doing something? It must be seamless, intrinsic, so all of the things that you were talking about. And multiple forms of intelligence. So it can be imagination, like you were talking about the tangible and the intangible. It can be cognitive, most certainly creative, but also design-led thinking, which is also at the heart of design-led thinking, is usually also based on anthropology. It's usually ethnographic in design as well. So applied intelligence is a sensibility for invention and setting new courses. It adopts a cognitive lens to view sustainability with a focus on applied intelligence producing technology-driven advancements. You get lots of smart systems innovation, recasting, reinventing, quite visionary, finding new opportunities for convergence, which is a key word for, so we talked about co-creation, collaboration. Convergence is actually where the emerging narrative for sustainability must come, and actually assumes that sustainable actions and values are embedded into practices, our everyday businesses thinking and process. So you just can't not be sustainable, and that is pretty much what I heard you at the back table there saying. So, and then creativity is new, imaginative, creative take on sustainability. So a theme of anticipation and excitement. So I think what's really important is we need to start to make sustainability infectious and to feel good, and for it to be something that isn't just sort of like hippie kind of cool. It's not nostalgic. It's not bad and angry. So it needs to be about problem solving, and that humans are equally the problem solvers, not the problem. And humans as imaginative problem solvers, innovators, thinking up new and better possibilities and ways of living. It can be multicoloured, not green. It must be artistic, joyful, youthful, positive. So there's a whole new generation of people, and consumers in particular, who just think this is just the way that the world should be. So here's an example. You saw some of the doom and the gloom around Shell. Now, admittedly, a little, maybe they've gone a bit too excited, a bit too early, but nevertheless, they have embraced this notion of adaptive intelligence. You've probably seen all these things, so I'm just using them to dramatise. Got some big budgets, these guys. Okay, I'm not going to play the whole thing. That's kind of cool, but just in the sense that if you look at that, this is going to be the best day. So sustainability is in the present. So don't use frames like imagine the future. It's here and it's now. If you do want to protect for future generations, you're in the stewardship narrative. So be clear about that. If you don't want to be in the stewardship narrative, which is attached to mutualism, then make sure that you're not there. So it's just been really conscious and intentional about how all these things are framed. The other thing that I think that's really important to get across here is that you do not need to, as businesses, as well as the consumer, you do not need to feel a little bit awkward or ashamed. We're not ready to go out and celebrate yet, because actually we have to all be sustainable. So it is okay if you're not perfect. It's okay if you haven't got everything synced perfectly right. You just need to be able to understand how you shift and start to have those conversations and say, we're part of this conversation of not being perfect. You're not either consumers, but we aren't either, but we're going to work together to get there, and we just have to start singing off that same hymn sheet. Then design-led thinking, again, look at the imagery in this, look at that inside the human brain is nature. We are intrinsic with, we are the same, we're not separate to. I love the light bulb in the flower. You know, what that's really symbolising is that they are one and the same. They're not separate, they're not even together. It's not even the hand holding the twig branch anymore. It's not partnership. It's gone way beyond that. And actually we are nature, nature is us, which is exactly what you were saying as well. So sustainability just becomes who we are. We cannot not be as consumers. Therefore we cannot not be as businesses, but we certainly cannot assume that our consumers aren't, in a way that makes us seem a little bit at times arrogant. And so effortless user experience becomes really, really central to sustainability. So really good design-led, technology-led thinking, integration of supply chain, but also service becomes a really important product that you need to be able to sell as much as a FMCG product or a tangible product. New and better realities, not future, R&D, future-proofing. So we need to be working with, you talked about collaborating. As a council group, we should be the companies, we should all be working together, because we will be the ones that survive. We won't be the dinosaurs. We're the ones that know that we are going to be able to be profitable and valuable and in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years. The ones that won't be, that are not actually already sustainable, will get left behind. Naturally so, not just because consumers stop engaging with them. So digital first becomes really important. Radical disruption we talked about, and companies and customers and nature interacting effortlessly and easily with each other. So here's where GE is sort of now. If you thought about where they were at in the dominant code of how we might be able to put energy can help us, now it's sustainability is a standard, it's a necessity, it's design-led thinking, but it's powered by human thinking as well. And here the adult is actually intelligent, not like the bad mum and the feeding the knowing child peanut butter.
Underwater fans that are powered by the moon. My mom makes airplane engines that can talk. My mom makes hospitals you can hold in your hand. My mom can print amazing things right from her computer. My mom makes trains that are friends with trees. My mom works at GE.
So, you know, the point we talked about where we can learn from nature, you know, the plane with the wings and that being the plane and nature at the same time. I mean, how all that imagery is portrayed and plays out in this ad's really interesting. So, well, great, because you captured it all pretty much. I've just sort of put it on a page just to sort of sum up the evolution, the journey of the sustainability story. And because sustainability's overarching metaphor is of our journey, we need to make sure we're really consciously knowing where are we at, what are the emerging codes, what are the narratives, do we want to be there, should we shift, when do we shift, and how do we do that in a way that's authentic and concordant with consumers and also with our other business suppliers. So residual codes, you know, save the world from destruction. Brands asserting often onto the consumer the need to stop, do this, come and join us, we're amazing. If you're with us, at least you know that's one sort of step closer to not being a bad person. It's often quite beyond what's achievable for the brand. The brand isn't actually literally all on its own saving the world, and just by going and joining that company or buying that product, nor could you possibly. It's very absolutist, doom and gloom, reduces environmental impact as its locus of action. And implied is that the consumer's responsible for, it's our responsibility as a consumer to sacrifice or to compromise or to choose more wisely. Then if you look at the dominant codes where we are now, it is about restoring harmony, with the assumption for harmony being there must be two separate entities for which we are meant to be joining. So brands strive to address environmental and social inequity or imbalance by seeking to be part of that solution. Ideally, if you're really advanced, part of that solution hand in hand with the consumer. Supportive, realism, empathetic, hopeful, altruistic. Brands or consumers in nature come together for good, and implied here in terms of the locus of control, locus of action, is around shared responsibility for choices. And then now with the emerging codes, we have adapt and transform as our overarching narrative or metaphor for what is sustainability. Sustainability reflects the convergence of economic, environmental and social imperatives and value. It frames the realities, the here and the now progress, as positive, dynamic and optimistic. Holistic assemblage is central. So there's this big thread that sits around everything. So you don't want to just pick off one bit and go, let's just celebrate that bit over there, or let's just be about the environment, or we're just going to focus on climate control. And also business, humans and nature applying imaginative new thinking to progress consumer goals. So at the end of this, we're in business, not just to be amazing businesses, but to progress the goals of consumers, and the goals of consumers are those ones that we showed you that relative to sustainability that Comar Brunton have already done some research on. But importantly, it doesn't require sacrifice or compromise. It's effortless, it's easy, it just is. And that's the trick, that's the rub. How do we make sure that we're actually doing that? Okay, coffee time. If anybody wants to chat more, if you want us to come in and just have a sort of in your own boardroom or office, have a chat. If you want to know what we think your brands might be doing, please feel free. And if you'd like a copy of this, Because it's difficult with the ads in it, I have to sort of send it in links. Please just email. We are more than happy to share this thinking with you.
Hello and welcome back, everyone. We're just running a little over time, so I just wanted to, sorry to stop the conversations, but there'll be another chance after this. I'll make it really fast. One, because that's a super hard act to follow. So I'm just going to go through this bit on the good life quite fast. Also, I think rather than thinking of this as having to reset your brain, and this is part 2, just think of it as an additional layer to what we've talked about this morning. So it's just a really quick introduction to the Good Life 2.0, which is called the Playbook, that was produced by WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Worked with Havas on this over the last year or so. And we're really privileged to have a video from Julian Hill-Landolt just giving us an overview. And then I'll run you through a little bit more about it and a couple of questions to challenge you and get you talking, just adding to the challenge that we set you earlier.
Hi there, my name is Julian Hill-Landolt and I am the Director of the Sustainable Lifestyles work here at WBCSD in Geneva, which is why I'm not with you in New Zealand today, much as I would have loved to have been. I'm going to say a few words on this piece of work that we've done, the Good Life 2.0 playbook. But from the outset, I do need to say that there's a fantastic webinar available on our website where we cover everything that you would want to know about this piece of work inside of 30 minutes. And I do recommend that you go there for the full context to what I think is a really exciting piece of work, because I can't do it justice in 5 minutes here, but I will try. So firstly, just to quickly make sure that we're all aware of why we're looking at sustainable lifestyles. It's pretty simple. As I'm sure you're aware, there's a big projected growth in the middle class globally over the next 15, 20 years. The middle class today is already consuming well beyond what the planet can provide. And it really is the middle class. So the point at which lifestyle impacts begin to get problematic is the point at which you have a middle income, regardless of where you live. As soon as you have a middle income, it doesn't matter if it's $20,000 in India or $80,000 a year in the United States, you get access to the same things. You get access to a bigger home, to a richer diet, to leisure, to disposable income, to personal mobility, all these things that drive our footprints, as they're called. So that's why we do the work. At WBCSD, we focus in on 3 main areas. One is looking at where the impacts are actually occurring. A second is, based on that, where do we need innovations and what do those innovations look like? They tend to be systemic, i.e. beyond companies' current product portfolios. And finally, if we do figure out how to offer more sustainable lifestyles to people, how do we get them to actually engage with them? And in hard currency terms, that basically means how do we get people to buy these more sustainable innovations that we're coming up with. The playbook is one of our answers to that final question about engagement. How do we inspire people to live more sustainable lifestyles? So the work on the playbook came about as a result of conversations with a WBCSD member called Havas, which is a global media agency. And we tried to look at whether or not marketers would be able to sell a better world. That was the starting point for our conversations. Marketing has been very successful at creating the world that we currently live in. 70 years of marketing have led us to want more of everything, basically, is what it boils down to. That's what we aspire to today. And we believe that part of the reason that companies have been unsuccessful so far in engaging people in the sustainability efforts that they have made, or in sustainability initiatives that they try to engage their customers with, has been as a result of the aspirations that people hold. Aspirations today are in conflict with what people perceive more sustainable living to be. Long story short, the work identified that what people are actually aspiring to today might not be in their best interests, that the social and community costs, as well as the financial and environmental costs of the lifestyles that we aspire to are not necessarily in our best interests. And that was really the hook for how we started looking at this idea of the Good Life 2.0. If you've been able to download the playbook, you'll see that it's all, it's a picture book, it's all Instagram images. And that was because as we went through the work of trying to understand how companies could inspire people to live more sustainably, we came across a significant group of people already practicing some of the things that we were suggesting needed to be encouraged, who were rejoicing almost in areas of their lives where they were able to live better rather than live more. And so we trawled Instagram essentially and found thousands of images and then sifted out what was going to be in conflict with more sustainable living and grouped together the images that were in support of more sustainable living into the categories that you see in the playbook. But essentially all we're trying to do is to offer a real, authentic picture of people aspiring to lifestyles that could be in line with more sustainable living. Because essentially those pictures are incredibly powerful. They're observations of how people are really living. They're real customers. And so we can use the playbook to start more constructive conversations with marketing departments within our companies. Why do we need to have more constructive conversations with marketing departments? Because we need them to generate demand. We need them to generate demand for the kinds of lifestyles that would be in line with more sustainable living. We need them to understand how they can play a role in keeping companies relevant in a world that is more sustainable, which we have to achieve. And it's not la-la land. There are companies who are already promoting this idea of better over bigger and being very successful at it. IKEA is a perfect example. And there are other examples, left, right, and centre, of how demand is beginning to shift, be it for smaller homes and different types of furniture, or different mobility options, or people taking far more interest in the food that they're eating. Now, admittedly, this is a very much, these are middle-class trends, but middle-class trends become mainstream aspirations. So it's just an incredibly fertile area to explore, and we're very excited about what we can do with companies by starting off these more constructive conversations. We're doing some other work at the moment at WBCSD that provides companies with some guidance on where they could actually be looking to innovate at the same time, because we think that there's the playbook starts that conversation, but then you need to be able to back it up with something. And I'm very excited to share that with both our members and with our global network partners by the end of the year at the latest. So there you have it. It's that's as brief a summary as I can offer. I hope it's been helpful. Please do feel free to come back to me with any questions that you might have. I'd love to hear the perspective from the Southern Hemisphere in your little corner of the world. So very happy to hear the outcome of your discussions today, and I wish you a successful meeting. Thank you.
So it's quite a mystery there. Watch this space for what's coming next. I think, we'll keep in touch and see what's coming up there. But great to have that from Geneva this week. And I think you gave so much of an overview. I just want to reinforce a few points. One being that the playbook is not about selling sustainability. I think the more that you read through it, the more you do realise that that's their intention. So if you hadn't had a chance to look at it yet, don't worry about that. We'll just have a look later, and after a couple of times reading that, you can see what their intent is there. And they really want it to be about starting a conversation with people in your company. It could be someone in R&D, it could be someone in innovation, it could be with your CEO. When I talked to him about this, he described it as an antagonistic piece of work, that he wants it to be a really big challenge for businesses to have a fresh look at their aspirations that can be created through your brand marketing to support a sustainable lifestyle. So some of you might have seen this if you've had a look through, but this is how they've distilled the visual vernacular after going through all the Instagram pictures. And what they want brands and marketers to do is to use this visual vernacular as a peek into the world that their customers can aspire to, as a backdrop and context for brand and product communications and collateral, and inspiration for product development and innovation. So the 4 elements they've got here are home and family, time to slow down, the journey matters, and work and life in balance. And this is just a summary of where they're seeing the shift, a simplistic way of showing from to. So it's from living large to being connected, from driving solo to sharing journeys and so on. And while we've talked a lot today about things being niche, but trying to get out of that niche element, so who's this playbook for? Well, they've got some suggestions here about how different sectors and different kinds of businesses, products and services can use this different visual vernacular, but it's meant to be part of an evolving conversation. So none of this is static or set in stone. It's really about talking at your workplace about how your own brand can redefine aspirations. And he mentioned IKEA as well. There are a few other brands that I think they see playing in the same space, and what they've sifted through that they think they do really well is their brand behaviour is a cycle of listening and looking closely at what customers really need, want and expect, eliminating friction, anticipating and addressing the changing needs and desires of the marketplace, recognising and rewarding customer commitment with the brand experience as social currency, and continuously growing their market universe. So that's the briefest of brief, look into the good life. I will send the webinar link to you all after this as well, because it does provide a really good context, and you can have another look at the playbook with fresh eyes. But what I'd like to do, again, this not being part 2 versus Jack's presentation, but 1.1a, is just ask another question for you to talk about amongst your groups and on your tables. So what we would like to know is, at your workplace, when you're talking about your brand and marketing communications, do these values such as home and family and time to slow down ever come up in conversation? And if so, who are you having those conversations with? Is it in a tiny silo business unit, or are they with other people? And if you're not having those conversations, when you step out of this room and go back to work, who will you talk to about that? So I will just give you a few minutes to talk amongst yourselves.